Tēnei. A warm welcome to you all to our second webinar in our Festival of Adult Learning series. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Rachel Karalus, Māhera Maihi and Julia Milne today. Community innovators, Rachel Karalus from K'Aute Pasifika in Hamilton, Māhera Maihi, formerly of Te Ara Rangatahi in Waiuku, and now with Mate Huruhuru, and Julia Milne from Common Unity Project in Lower Hutt. They're going to discuss communities, identity and inclusion and present three different models for nurturing potential and helping others achieve sustainable, fulfilling lives. I think we all agree that the events of the year have raised many questions, challenges and uncertainties for how our communities might look in the future. And right now, I think we could all do with a little bit of inspiration. So we're really fortunate to have some of Aotearoa's leading community innovators with us to share some insights today. I'm going to ask Rachel to begin by telling us a little bit about her organisation, K'Aute Pasifika, and then our other speakers will follow. We'll have some time for questions at the end, and you can submit those via the Facebook page. So we'll get underway. Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Rachel.
Mā lolulei, talofa lava, whakalofa lahi atu, Māori, namaste, tēnā koutou katoa. Warm Pacific greetings to you all. Thank you very much for the privilege to join this series today. We'll just spend a few minutes giving you a bit of an overview about K'Aute Pasifika. So K'Aute Pasifika has been in existence for about 21 years, and it came into being as a response to Pacific people's lack of engagement with mainstream services. So it was identified that Pacific people weren't accessing primary healthcare services to the same extent as other communities 20 years ago, and the leaders at that time brought together the different groups that were in Hamilton, and they spent a weekend at a marae discussing what the issues were and whether everybody could work together to improve health outcomes for Pacific communities. And out of that conversation 21 years ago, K'Aute Pasifika was born. And so K'Aute Pasifika is a pan-Pacific organisation. We have representation from the different Pacific Island nations at both governance and operational levels. We're founded on Christian principles, so that permeates everything that we do, how we work with each other and how we work with our families. Our why really is to see thriving Pacific communities, and our mission is to improve the holistic well-being of Pacifica communities, not to the exclusion of others, though. We work with people from all ethnic backgrounds. Right from the very beginning, the aspiration was always to offer a holistic wraparound service, because we as Pacific peoples naturally work collectively. We tend to take a less individualistic view as opposed to a more coordinated, collective, together as family, as whānau, as ainga view. So it was always a holistic wraparound service for families that operates across all the wellbeing domains. It started with a focus on health. My mother was the founder. She doesn't like referring to herself as that, and she wouldn't be very happy that I'm referring to her as that. But in any event, that's how it started. She worked for free for a couple of years, and they got their first contract in the first 2 years, which was a well child contract, and from that the organisation has grown over the years. So we have historically provided wraparound services across three delivery arms, so health, social services and education. In our health service, we basically offer nurse-led services out in the community which cover from birth to death. So that's immunisations, well child, And so right through to an elderly day program. We have an extensive mental health service which has actually had to extend as a result of COVID-related impacts. So what we saw under the first lockdown was an increase in levels of anxiety and mental health issues for our young people and our older people, and our mental health services actually doubled in the last 8 or so weeks. In the social services team, we're doing integrated safety response, we do family wellbeing and family violence programs, we do budgeting, we also deliver whānau ora to 115 families across the Waikato region. From an education perspective, we've been running a program called Pasifika Power Up, which is a program for the whole family, and what we've found is that once you get the parents engaged and confident in education and understanding how the education system works, they tend to start to take their children on the education journey themselves. But quite apart from that, they end up getting interested in study for their own selves, which is I think the kind of outcome that needs to happen for us to see long-term intergenerational change for our families. And the other thing we're doing is Pasifika Playgroups, and that really is to provide a platform into the early learning space, which we're about to embark on over the next year. More recently, we've moved into employment and training supports and gambling harm prevention and reduction. So I think we really are starting to meet the original aspiration of offering a holistic wraparound service for our families. Our team, we have a team of 39 who, as I mentioned, cover the different Pacific Island groups. More recently, I've been in this role for 3 years, and more recently I sort of thought we were, we didn't have a stronger partnership with iwi as we should, and I kind of have been working on reflecting a mindfulness of our context, a mindfulness and respect of our context. And so in the last few years we've employed 6 Māori people, 4 of whom are fluent in te reo, and they've really been influencing our capability and capacity in the Indigenous space, which has been a really yeah, it's been fantastic for the organisation, to say the least. The team are social workers, nurses, counsellors, community support workers, covering a range of different disciplines. And over the course of the next year, we will be moving into the development of an integrated GP service. So, but it won't be a GP service in the traditional medical practice model, because what we know for our families is that the traditional model doesn't work and has actually failed our families in a lot of instances. So the GP will be integrated into what we're already doing, and will be not the most important person in the room, but just one of a team of people working with a family. Just in terms of our community, we have regular community engagement to check in that what we're doing is relevant, that what we're doing is actually meeting their needs. And it can be really difficult to meet needs when you're funded in a certain way. We're not funded to meet needs, we're funded to do a certain number of whatever it is. But what I'm hopeful of over the next few years is that we will move to a model which devolves more power to the provider to determine how their funding should be applied to meet the needs of the communities that they serve. But the point really was our community aspirations consistently are improved health, higher levels of education, more Pasifika and self-employment and business, languages and cultures maintained, and economic independence. So economic independence through fair remuneration, through the ability to be self-employed or have your own business, through the ability to move into leadership positions, you know, real pathways for improvement of our people. Yeah, and I think one thing is, the last comment I'll make is Pasifika overrepresented in all the statistics that are driven by deprivation. But I can tell you that not one of the families that we work with see themselves as unhealthy, overweight, deprived, uneducated. Far from it. They're resilient, resourceful, vibrant, faithful, optimistic, and grateful. And so I hope that's given you a pretty good overview of who we are and where our families sit. Whawhatai.
Thank you so much. What a huge, expansive brief you have. And bringing it all together must be quite a challenge for you all, but a beautiful whānau ora model. Thank you, Rachel. Māhera, would you like to tell us a little bit now about the work you've been doing?
Ai, Aotearoa koutou katoa. Me o ku whānau mā takitaki maina ki te kāinga. Tēnā rā koutou, ko Māhera Maihi tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Hine, Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Kuri, Te Aupauri, Te Taitokerau Whānui. Kia ora, thank you Mary, thank you for having me on your panel today. I come from a large whānau, big whānau, 7 sisters and 3 brothers. We come from Kaikohe. However, in the 1950s and 60s, our grandparents on both sides moved to Auckland. So for a long time, our whānau had been disconnected from our cultural and tribal roots. And we were raised in Otara, Manurewa, and then Papakura. So our dad was a part of the stormtrooper gangs, was a very big part of our upbringing, and we were exposed, with a dad who's a gangster, we were exposed to all of those, I suppose, intergenerational traumas. We were exposed to severe domestic violences, and we experienced physical abuse and emotional abuse and mental abuse. So it was I suppose some people can say it was kind of a struggle street upbringing. But coming from a big whānau, I always, and being the fourth youngest, yeah. I always tried to get my dad's attention, and I always tried to get his validation and his love. And so the way that I done that was by standing out and doing extra, doing more, and getting his attention, which was a good thing, because that meant everything that I touched turned to gold, because all I wanted was his hugs and his smile and his attention. And that became my hardwiring. So, and what I didn't realize was that I was creating capabilities and skills such as resilience and such as grit and such as motivation and drive, and also disruptive leadership qualities. And so these were instilled in me from a very, very young age. And also what I didn't realize was that I had found the formula to break the cycle. So, and that's the formula that I've been using for most of my life to get out of the, of the cards that were naturally dealt to us and to me when I was younger. So I got my first taste of working with rangatahi was at Child, Youth and Family in Kaikohe, and then I moved to Whangarei, and then I moved to Auckland to the Care and Protection residence here in Auckland. And I was that young, energetic, young Māori girl who was going to go in there and was going to smash down all of the barriers that oppressed our people, and I was going to fight the fight. And and I'm still fighting the fight, but what I learned over the 6 or so years that I was working with Child, Youth and Family is that it wasn't as easy as I thought. And to be quite frank, working within the organization, my fire was starting to diminish. And so what I done was I identified that very slowly, but I did identify that, I acknowledged it, and I decided to move out of the government as a public servant and move into iwi, which is where I met Kahurangi Taylor, or Kahurangi Malcolm, and she's the founder of Te Ara Rangatahi. And what I really liked about Te Ara Rangatahi, which is a youth organisation set in Waiuku, is that her narrative was a strengths-based approach to helping young people, as opposed to, you know, what we do naturally, which is a deficit reduction type of approach. And so I really like that, you know, that her company was founded by rangatahi, for rangatahi, and that it was very innovative. And I worked there. So I worked there for a few years, and that was in an iwi space, working with young people, but in an iwi space, quite different to the government. But what I know as well is that my iwi in Ngāpuhi, we represent the largest proportion of Māori. We're the largest iwi group, 150,000 of us, and that was in the 2013 census. So there was always going to be a time where I come back to work with my iwi, and I feel like my destiny was predetermined. You know, there's a reason why I went through the struggle street life that I was raised into. There's a reason why God put me into all of these places. It's all God's plan. And so then we started Mā Te Huruhuru, which is our own youth organisation. We work particularly with young people who are in care, and we provide services and we provide programs to share this formula that I found to break the cycle with these young people who are currently going through, you know, those kind of same issues that I did. So what I learned was that I couldn't make change through government. It was a bit of a struggle to make change through iwi, although there was huge growth there. But the greatest impact that I've been able to make is at a whānau level. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Māhera. I love your notion of the strengths-based approach, which many of us have found to be absolutely the way to begin with youth in particular. And I can certainly see that, Rachel, your organisation is very much coming from that place as well. Thank you. Kia ora. Julia, would you like to tell us a little bit about your organisation now?
Sure. Kia ora. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Julia. Warmest greetings from a very grey Te Awa Kairangi today. I don't know what it's like at your place, but it's very cold and miserable here. So I'm Julia, and I run the Common Unity project. We have been based here in Lower Hutt for 8 years now, and we started off, I started off at this beautiful little school, Ipuni school, with my friend Conrad, and we really, the whole intention of the project was just to grow a massive garden and teach the children how to grow their own kai and involve as many of the parents and wider community in that action as possible. And it really was as simple as that. So we secured the soccer field. They had a big disused soccer field, and we turned it into an urban farm, and we started to grow a lot of food, and right at the outset negotiated with the school community that gardening wasn't something that was just going to be taught to a group of children and have a club. We wanted it to be integrated into their curriculum and give access to every single child of a Ipuni school the possibility of coming and spending time in this garden, and that still exists to this day. And it's been just an extraordinary evolution to be part of, and of course with an intention to simply grow some food and feed some children. It's quite a simple one, but of course has morphed into being involved in multiple sites and now rolling a really big project right across the Hutt Valley. So we we were feeding and making lunches within 3 months of being there, and there had been a disused classroom on the school site, which the school gave us the use of. And we just opened that up every day and invited the parent body to come and do whatever it was that they wanted to do, really, to really take the lead in recognising their own needs or support that they needed or anything that they wanted to learn. And by the time we moved out of the school 3 years ago, in that classroom we had sewing, knitting, beekeeping, art, but sometimes all of these things would be happening all at the same time. And it was just this beautiful thing to watch what happens when you simply create a space and invite a community to come and not only learn what they want to learn, but the mentors and teachers that delivered those classes, courses or sessions were actually just from the community themselves too. So lots of really beautiful things happened, and it soon became really apparent with, particularly with our little beekeeping group that the dads were involved with in the classroom and in the community, that actually some of the stuff we were doing was becoming quite commercial and was providing opportunity for employment. So we really did need to move from the school base. So we moved over the road, and that's where we are now. We took on an old plaster factory. So we have 1,500 square metres of space here, which we call a community enterprise hub, and it's called the Remakery, and that's where I'm sitting right now. Formerly a plaster factory, but now dedicated to the community to just come and do cool stuff. And so we open it up 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and the community comes. And pre-COVID, we were really quite diverse in what it was that we were offering here. We built an off-grid community kitchen almost 2 years ago now, which sits out the front in a shipping container, and that became our place and space to produce really beautiful meals that we send back out into the community. And we now feed 5 schools. We work in with our local marae, who distributes to our homeless community and those that are living vulnerable in motels, recognising that actually we've got a lot of whānau here in the Hutt Valley living in temporary accommodation that can't cook meals for themselves. We work with our local Women's Refuge, providing meals there as well. And we now have about 15 different growing sites across the Hutt Valley, including a really big project that we run in collaboration with Rimataka Prison. So everywhere we grow food goes my lovely farm manager Hannah and her band of merry farming volunteers, and education sits right alongside what it is that we do, understanding that actually a lot of people give up on producing or growing food because they hit problems along the way, or they don't have access to resources that might be free. So we just run endless sessions here at the Remakery and also across our differing sites in the Hutt Valley that people are able to come and learn with no cost or no charge, just contribution of time. So we have a vision and a mission around ensuring every child has a village, and for us what that means is that our children and whānau are our collective call to action, that a whole lot of other things happen when we start activating the space of meeting the needs of our children and coming together to make our decisions in our community around what is best for them. It also means and allows us to work with diversity of thinking, of religious beliefs. It doesn't really matter who it is or where you have come from. We all want our children to do well, and it means that every single person in our community is purposeful and is cherished and is precious in that, including our elders. And I think often the skills and ability and experiences of our elders really get set aside in our communities and aren't given enough voice. But they've lived through some stuff, and they have experiences that can be so enriching and nourished and so needed at this time, but we don't often create enough space for them to come and be. So that's a really big and important thing for us around here. COVID has meant that we have refined some of what we are learning and doing here in the Remakery, and we have a particularly strong focus around food and the development of resilient food networks, because I think we've really learnt over the last few months the fragility of our food system, but also alongside that, this ever increasing need for emergency food that a lot of our whānau are now having to live with, and that we need to be developing some more sustainable ways of being able to nourish ourselves and one another in this COVID time. So we're doing lots of work in the space around that, and a real pivot for us into a food hub and a learning place, so that we can be sharing what it is that we are doing and helping other organisations and communities get up and going in that food resilient space. So it's really lovely to be here today. Thank you, Mary, for inviting me, and really loving hearing what's happening in Hamilton and Auckland. Beautiful to be here. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mary.
Thank you for that reminder, Viv. I'm now unmuted. I'm just thinking about the diverse community that you're serving in Lower Hutt, and we're aware that there are quite large communities of refugees and migrants in that community. How have you connected with them? Have they come to you, or have they naturally been drawn to your new space where they can learn and meet others?
They have. They did come to us, and particularly when Syrian refugee community was settling here in Lower Hutt, they came and they wanted to sew. So I think having beautiful spaces that they could just simply come and be together, and we learnt that actually the best place for language learning is when you're doing something, and that was a piece of feedback that we have heard on high repeat from many of our former refugee and migrant communities, is actually they are often compelled to have to go to language classes because that gets tied up with their benefit. But the places where they really learn well is, of course, in community, doing that shoulder-to-shoulder stuff, working on a project, gardening, sewing, whatever that looks like. So I think there's real opportunity there to be examining how we are learning English or learning language in different ways in New Zealand. And I had hoped to pick some of that work up this year, but in this COVID environment, that isn't a priority for us right now when we are looking at food and meals. One of the things that we have really struggled with, and is finding appropriate support sometimes for the diversity that does exist in our community. It's one thing to welcome people into our whare, but it's another thing to really wrap around them the care and support that often they need. And particularly not just with language, but about the fact that often they want to be together. Certainly our Syrian community really wanted to be together as a group, and which is deeply understandable, but how to really hold them securely and create those networks of care that they needed, that they were clearly really struggling with. And I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in the care of our migrants and refugees as they settle in New Zealand. We've heard some pretty tragic stories of just what the struggle is like. And I think some of that is because often we focus on housing and homing people, but actually the conversation needs to be more about how it is that we bed people into a community, and that's quite a different thing. It's not enough to be offering a house and a roof over someone's head and thinking that they will thrive because they have that. There is a whole connection to community that needs to happen, and I think it's deeply under-resourced, and often we do more harm than we intend to as we resettle people.
Kia ora, Julia. Rachel, have you, I know that you too have quite a refugee and migrant community in Hamilton. Have you found that they are difficult to reach, or have you been able to bring them into your whānau?
It became quite apparent under the first lockdown that there was a lack of support for our ethnic communities and refugee communities, and actually they have a couple of leaders that reached out to us, and through that mechanism we were able to offer the same supports that we were offering to everyone else. I know from talking with other providers in the food security space that language is a real barrier for these families. I think there's a lot more that can be done, yeah. But from our perspective, the ability to be able to do simple things like offer care packages, pay unpaid bills, whatever is top of mind for that family at that point in time is actually a real privilege.
Mm. Māhera, I'm interested too in how you are making connections with your community. How do you engage with your youth? How do you find them? How do you attract them into your programs?
Yeah, what's been interesting actually is that of recent, what I've noticed is that diversity and inclusion has been quite a major focus for government agencies and also organisations. And I was reading, in New Zealand, they created their diversity and inclusion policy in 2019. Xero created theirs in 2018. The EEO was developed and created in 1992, but they didn't change the name to Diversity Works till 2016. So this concept of diversity and inclusion is quite a new thing that we're looking into. However, for over 1,000 years, diversity and inclusion has been a traditional practice of Māori people. You call it inclusion, we call it kotahitanga, working together, uniting. You call it diversity, but we call it understanding that people come from different places, they've got different sexual preferences, different colour skin, different races. We call that to aki someone's mana, manaki. So these aren't new concepts for Māori, and it's very natural and seamless and effortless for Māori people and Pasifika as well to transfer Māori from one person to another. So working and collaborating with other organisations is very, very easy. And that tells me is that our tupuna had it right right from the beginning. And that for, you know, the answers aren't very far away. You just have to look to Indigenous people and to what their practices are. And just as Rachel touched on as well, is that Māori people and Pasifika people, they're not individualists. We don't work in silo, we don't work alone. We are a collective group of people, which is why it's so traumatic when you uplift a young person from their whānau and place them into non-kin, because you're stripping away, you know, the core essence of the young person from their whānau. And yeah, I'm just very proud of our tupuna and very proud of these taonga tuku iho that we are now able to share with New Zealand, our tikanga and our kawa, because therein lies the answers to a lot of it. We can do more when we do it together. And how do we, you know, get referrals for young people? Honestly, I will walk into a site or, you know, an oranga tamariki place and present, you know, my why, and then I will just get referrals. Like, it's really that easy, and because it actually really is easy. And I think a lot of it has got to do with relatability as well. So we can relate with our young people on a level that other mainstream organisations can't. You can't get down to that level because there's Waiuku attached to it. But Māori people and Pasifika people, we have that in our DNA. It's part of our architect. So yeah, together we can do more. And that I think about a whakatauki when I say that, e hara taku toa, engari he toa takitini, which means my strength is not based on on one single warrior, but the strength of many. Ai.
Kia ora, Māhera.
Kia ora.
I'm thinking now about the challenges and opportunities. Obviously, we're living in such strange times, and new priorities will have perhaps appeared for each of your organisations. What might you do a little differently in the future, or will you just be strengthening the work that you do?
I suppose, speaking from a Māori pro-Māori lens, our biggest challenge for sustainable community development is is the need for systemic change. So hea te mea nui o te ao, māku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? I will tell you, it is the people. It is the people, it is the people. Yesterday we celebrated the National Suicide Prevention Day. In 2019, we had 685 whānau commit suicide. And as Rachel touched on earlier as well, Pasifika and Māori make up the largest proportion for people who are in jails and people who, male, female, and also young people in residence. We're 7 times more likely to be targeted by the law. And so basically we account for the largest proportion of the worst stats in New Zealand. So there are definitely opportunities. The opportunities that I believe are systemic changes, constitutional changes, honouring te tiriti, resourcing Māori and Pasifika whānau to work for themselves. You know, some people say we don't have the infrastructure or the capacity to be able to do that for ourselves. But when the first COVID lockdown happened and the nation shut down, the Māori nation didn't shut down. You know, what we saw was an uprising of iwi, hapu, whānau, Māori organisations rise and support and wrap around their people, not only Māori people, but, all nations, or all ethnicities, to provide them with food and care packs and survival packs so that we could flourish. When I think about sustainable community development, I also think of whenua warriors, which is a shout out to my sisters there. What they do is they build community and whānau kai gardens. And I know Julia was touching on that as well. That's sustainable living when we can harvest our own water, water tanks and water catchment systems, so that we're living you know, off-grid almost, where we've got our own solar panels, where we've got our renewable energy sources, where, you know, we're replenishing our moana and our lakes and our creeks so that we can go and hiika, ruku kai moana, where we can go and catch our own food. Like, these are all ways that we can, you know, opportunities for government, whoever, to offer us sustainable community development. And the last thing that I probably want to add is that for our young people especially, we do need that wraparound support. Julia's right, we need that wraparound support to work alongside our young people in the education space as, you know, more teacher aides, more counsellors, more mentors, more people to really sit beside our young people in this preventative space. And I'm actually, I think I'm talking about young people who are in care, young people who are most vulnerable and at risk. So we work alongside them in this, we front load in the beginning so that we prevent them from going down this pathway to corrections or pathway to intergenerational trauma. And that to me is sustainable community development.
Kia ora, Māhera.
Can I just say, Māhera, I think your tipuna would be very, very proud of you.
Kia ora that.
Keep going, girl.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rahira.
I love your notion of front loading. I think that is just such a great phrase to describe, you know, pouring that resource in, you know, to particularly our rangatahi to build them up and make them strong and resilient for whatever will come in the future. Rachel, do you anticipate any particular opportunities coming out of this post sort of COVID-19 phase that we've been in? Any learning in particular?
I think the real thing, the issue I have is that COVID-19 has really shone a light on the complexities that many of our Māori and Pacific and other vulnerable families are living with. And I get a bit frustrated because there's people talking about it like it's new stuff, but it's not new stuff, it's pre-existing deprivation. So while COVID has shone a light on it, the opportunity is here right now, as Māhera said, to make the necessary systemic changes that are going to result in improved outcomes for our people. And just sort of picking up on what, you know, around the whole collaboration thing, you know, for us, what works is finding people who share the same values to collaborate with, because that's what will introduce longevity to the collaborative effort. But also people getting their egos out of the mix and putting the families that we serve at the centre of everything that we do. And if you can find people with that same approach to things, then your collaborative effort, in my opinion, is going to be very successful and impactful. Yeah.
Kia ora. Julia, anything to add there?
Yeah, a couple of things. So just touching on what you were saying, Māhera, about, you know, I think that connecting our rangatahi and our whānau back to the whenua, that actually all this, you know, lots of conversation going on right now about growing food, and you mentioned our water, and you mentioned some of the great projects that are happening around Aotearoa in that space. But actually, I think that we have people in governance roles that are not connected to the whenua and do not, as a result, make good long-term, sustainable, safe decisions that will ensure the longevity, not just of our people, but of our planet. And I think the most powerful thing that we could ever do for a child or a human is to help them connect to the very thing that sustains us. Because actually when we realise that we live as part of something and that we need one another, we are always going to ensure that everyone does okay and that the planet is not pillaged or plundered in the way that it is currently doing. So these two things must coexist together. I also think that there is some and that must be considered when we think about systemic change, that we live in a system that is far bigger than just a human-centered one, and within that, within the system, and I'm talking the government system now, in our funding system, I think we need some fundamental shifts in terms of how our work is funded. I think often there is a culture of competition, not collaboration, that exists. I think that gives rise to an industry of poverty, and I think that absolutely ensnares our vulnerable whānau right from day one. When we do not fund, our vulnerable whānau often have an outcome placed upon them. How it is that we are counting and measuring deliverables back into these services that government are providing is just so deeply wrong. For example, something that we're looking at right now is the new school lunch program that is being rolled out across across New Zealand. And when we start to put a price tag on that hungry child that needs a lunch, rather than funding an outcome or a community response to that child, then we are setting up more industry of poverty that captures people as opposed to allowing them to live in a connected, vibrant, collaborative, whānau-based way. And there's a real danger that and if we are thinking about systems change, then all of that needs to fall away, and we need to really lobby hard to how it is that government sets these scenarios up. Of course, I'm also a great believer then finding the people that are doing good and are speaking into the same shared kaupapa, because there is something about coming together to create our own system that will inevitably topple the one that no longer serves us fairly or with equity.
Kia ora, Julia. I want to thank you all very, very much for being with us today. In the ACE sector, we pride ourselves on being innovators, but I think the models that you have shown us today are absolutely inspirational. And it gives me great heart to think that you're out there doing such incredible work, and it is community-led, and it's growing. And I think that for so long we have continued to depend on our politicians for solutions, when we know that the solutions are in our communities, if we can just work together to find those solutions and care for people. So thank you so much, and I hope that there'll be an opportunity in the future, possibly at an ACE conference, for us to come together and with others and revisit some of these issues today. So thank you everybody else out in the world of Facebook who's been with us today. And if you are wanting to share this kōrero with your teams, it will be available on video later. So ngā mihi nui, hei kuna mai.
Kia ora, ki Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Ora.
Alo apito.